We are headed towards a post-singularity simulated future. And everything points towards us becoming a simulated species and being able to upload our consciousness, quantify our consciousness, and put that into a simulation. And I don't necessarily think it's us that may control it. I think it's going to be the AI systems, the quantum computers of the future. Those systems will create the simulations. They will draw us in. Some may do it on purpose and some by accident. Whether that's a choice that we make or whether that's a choice that the machines make is something we'll have to find out when we get to the future. I wrote about the sim generation in a book called The Future of Business, and the idea was that this generation that we're seeing right now, they are the simulated generation. So by the time that they reach their early 20s, living inside of a simulated virtual reality for those kids, it's not going to be uncommon, it's not going to be foreign to them. They are the first generation that goes way beyond just the internet. It goes way beyond virtual reality. It goes into living part-time inside of a simulated reality. We are getting so good at simulating reality at this point. If you look at video games, if you look at virtual reality, the visual effects in movies, it's gotten to the point where you're almost crossing into that uncanny valley where you cannot tell the difference between what is real and what's not real. But in the future, I expect to see this sim generation where they spend a huge portion of their lives in a simulated reality. They're going to meet their friends, play, get married, have children, all inside of the simulated reality in the future. They could have an entire life that exists in the simulated world, and they also have their real life. So there's this mirrored, partitioned world that these kids are going to live in, where half of their lives is spent in the simulated world and half of their lives is spent in what we call the reality world, which in fact may not be the original reality. When we cross the event horizon into the sim generation, into the simulated world, whether we remember what is pre-singularity is the question. We may not remember it. Going back to hacking into the brain and cognitive continuity, you may see a post-singularity simulated future where the simulation removes the memories of this real life, quote unquote real life. It may remove all of that. It may remove the transition in your memory. If we upload our consciousness into machine substrates, and if AI builds these simulated realities that are indistinguishable from the reality that we see around us now, we may not remember the threshold of crossing from this reality into the simulated reality. This may have happened many times before, and that's maybe where we find ourselves now. This may not even be the original. It may be that this happens again and again and again and again and again into infinity, and the transition point may always be erased by the machines themselves. They may just extract that transition for us so that we don't even remember ever having a real reality. But I do think that's where we head after the singularity, after we reach that state where computers are smarter than humans and where they are accessing data and creating worlds for us, virtual worlds for us, faster than we can even comprehend that they're doing it. Once that happens, then you're inside of the simulated reality. Whether this reality that we find ourselves in is simulated or not, which can be debated, we are headed towards a simulated future. We are headed towards a post-singularity simulated future. And everything points towards us becoming a simulated species and being able to upload our consciousness, quantify our consciousness, and put that into a simulation. And I don't necessarily think it's us that may control it. I think it's going to be the AI systems, the quantum computers of the future. Those systems will create the simulations. They will draw us in. Some may do it on purpose and some by accident. Whether that's a choice that we make or whether that's a choice that the machines make is something we'll have to find out when we get to the future. I wrote about the sim generation in a book called The Future of Business, and the idea was that this generation that we're seeing right now, they are the simulated generation. So by the time that they reach their early 20s, living inside of a simulated virtual reality for those kids, it's not going to be uncommon, it's not going to be foreign to them. They are the first generation that goes way beyond just the internet. It goes way beyond virtual reality. It goes into living part-time inside of a simulated reality. We are getting so good at simulating reality at this point. If you look at video games, if you look at virtual reality, the visual effects in movies, it's gotten to the point where you're almost crossing into that uncanny valley where you cannot tell the difference between what is real and what's not real. But in the future, I expect to see this sim generation where they spend a huge portion of their lives in a simulated reality. They're going to meet their friends, play, get married, have children, all inside of the simulated reality in the future. They could have an entire life that exists in the simulated world, and they also have their real life. So there's this mirrored, partitioned world that these kids are going to live in, where half of their lives is spent in the simulated world and half of their lives is spent in what we call the reality world, which in fact may not be the original reality. When we cross the event horizon into the sim generation, into the simulated world, whether we remember what is pre-singularity is the question. We may not remember it. Going back to hacking into the brain and cognitive continuity, you may see a post-singularity simulated future where the simulation removes the memories of this real life, quote unquote real life. It may remove all of that. It may remove the transition in your memory. If we upload our consciousness into machine substrates, and if AI builds these simulated realities that are indistinguishable from the reality that we see around us now, we may not remember the threshold of crossing from this reality into the simulated reality. This may have happened many times before, and that's maybe where we find ourselves now. This may not even be the original. It may be that this happens again and again and again and again and again into infinity, and the transition point may always be erased by the machines themselves. They may just extract that transition for us so that we don't even remember ever having a real reality. But I do think that's where we head after the singularity, after we reach that state where computers are smarter than humans and where they are accessing data and creating worlds for us, virtual worlds for us, faster than we can even comprehend that they're doing it. Once that happens, then you're inside of the simulated reality. Whether this reality that we find ourselves in is simulated or not, which can be debated, we are headed towards a simulated future. We are headed towards a post-singularity simulated future. And everything points towards us becoming a simulated species and being able to upload our consciousness, quantify our consciousness, and put that into a simulation. And I don't necessarily think it's us that may control it. I think it's going to be the AI systems, the quantum computers of the future. Those systems will create the simulations. They will draw us in. Some may do it on purpose and some by accident. Whether that's a choice that we make or whether that's a choice that the machines make is something we'll have to find out when we get to the future. I wrote about the sim generation in a book called The Future of Business, and the idea was that this generation that we're seeing right now, they are the simulated generation. So by the time that they reach their early 20s, living inside of a simulated virtual reality for those kids, it's not going to be uncommon, it's not going to be foreign to them. They are the first generation that goes way beyond just the internet. It goes way beyond virtual reality. It goes into living part-time inside of a simulated reality. We are getting so good at simulating reality at this point. If you look at video games, if you look at virtual reality, the visual effects in movies, it's gotten to the point where you're almost crossing into that uncanny valley where you cannot tell the difference between what is real and what's not real. But in the future, I expect to see this sim generation where they spend a huge portion of their lives in a simulated reality. They're going to meet their friends, play, get married, have children, all inside of the simulated reality in the future. They could have an entire...
Hi everybody, this is Gray Scott and this is the live version of Futuristic Now. Feel free to tweet your questions and your comments. This show is basically on the sim generation, the simulated future. That is what we're going to talk about this evening. So just to fill you guys in on what's been happening, of course I started the show about a month and a half ago. And it's been, the response has been pretty amazing. I've gotten all sorts of press and appearance requests, and there's just a lot of things happening right now. It's really exciting. But what I really want to talk about tonight is specifically the episode that was playing in the preview. And I think when we do these live episodes, that's probably what I'll do, is I'll show you guys, let me turn this off, sorry. I'll show you guys, this is also my first live doing the show, so if a light falls or if this ends abruptly, then it's because I'm not sure exactly how to work all the technology right now. So anyway, bear with me, I'm just a futurist. So tonight specifically, I wanted to talk to you quickly in the next 15 or 20 minutes about this episode, the simulated future, And I've gotten some pretty interesting questions on Twitter, and I've gotten some interesting comments on YouTube so far, and I just released the video a couple of hours ago. We all know about the simulated theory, the simulation hypothesis, but this episode specifically is going a little bit deeper into the idea of mind hacking and the continuity of memory. That's sort of what I wanted this episode to be about. So I laid the groundwork for the simulation hypothesis. For those of you who don't know what it is the idea that this reality could be a simulated or virtual computational reality. And if you've seen The Matrix, which is the easiest reference, that's the easiest way to describe it for someone who doesn't know what this is. But further down the rabbit hole, what we're really talking about here is in the future, as we progress towards the future, we are going to quantify our consciousness. We are going to simulate that. And as I said in the video, it may not be us that actually creates those simulations. It may be quantum computers of the future. So I think what we need to start off with this episode is, how do we get there? I want to talk about three specific things this evening. The first is, where are we with this simulation idea, the simulated future, right now? Two is how we get there. And three is what happens after the sort of post-singularity time period, which will be what I've been calling the simulated future. appears that that is where we're headed. And so I just wanted to give some background to where we are right now first. Right now, the University of Kyoto they've already proven that they can use an fMRI system and an EEG system, brain-computer interface, to output what people are seeing in their minds. And the most fascinating part about that is it's not just what they're seeing in real time. When they asked the subjects, they had about 10 subjects that they used for the study, and when they asked the subjects to recall the images that they were shown later, after the images were removed, they were still able, using this brain-computer interface, to read and output what they saw after they'd already removed the image. This is something I actually talked about in a video around 5 years ago. And I said at the time that we would experience dream recording in the future. And you guys can check that out on my channel. It's called Dream Recording. I think it was like the second or third episode of Futuristic Now. And I'm going to get to your questions and comments in a second, guys. But I just wanted to lay this first part out. So 5 years ago, when I read that study from the University of Kyoto, the original one, they were doing very crude symbols like an X and an O and a square in black and white. And so they were outputting that from a brain, literally reading the brain waves into the computer system. And you could see a pixelated cross or a pixelated circle or a pixelated square. And so I knew at the time after reading the study that we had finally crossed that threshold of being able to peer inside of the mind, and that would lead to eventually being able to read our dreams. And I do believe that is where we're headed. So fast forward, I think I made that video 4 or 5 years ago. Fast forward 5 years until this was, they released the study a couple of months ago. And now using deep neural network technologies and being able to use thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of images to match what people are seeing in their minds. It's not exactly what they're seeing, but it is a representation of what they're seeing using deep neural network technologies. So what I'm saying here is that this is the doorway into a future where we are reading minds, where we're able to peer inside of our minds and see what people are thinking, and potentially in the future read our own dreams, maybe even record our dreams. I mean, that's going to change the world. There are lots of other technologies out there that are coming. There are lots of other technologies out there that are emerging right now. They're still in the university settings, still in the laboratory settings, that still need to be proven to be effective before they hit the market, or before there's even a market for it. So we're actually talking maybe another 5 years before any sort of commercial, and that's an optimistic prediction, before anything commercial is available where you can record your memories or your dreams. I mean, right now, the EEG headset movement, like, companies like Muse and things like that, those companies are saturating the market right now. So there are a lot of EEG headsets where you can use your brain waves to meditate and control your computer and all sorts of things. I've actually flown a drone. I had a party here at my apartment, and we flew a drone with our minds, just with the thoughts, with the power of our minds. And so the threshold, the separation between the mind and the world really is starting to disappear. We're starting to be able to stretch our sensorial experience out into the world and control objects that we never had control of before. So that's the first leg of this, is sort of where we are. Where we are now is that we've already broken that barrier. The brain, the psychic sort of brain barrier has been broken. We can now peer into the brain and we can see what the mind is seeing. We can see memory now. This is not science fiction. This is what we're doing right now. So the next stage is the road to the post-singularity simulated future, which is what I talked about in this video this week. That's going to be a very interesting bridge that we're going to have to cross, because we're not really prepared ethically or psychologically for what we're discovering right now. I mean, we've known this, futurists have been talking about this for a very long time, that we are not necessarily prepared for this technology, that it's actually coming at us a lot faster than we have been able to evolve. And so my concern is that our ethics and our morality and who we are as sort of monkey minds, Kevin, if you're watching, that stuff is frightening to me because it's not the technology that I'm afraid of, it's what we are. And it's us, you know, putting our greed and our hatred and all those things into the system. Whatever we take with us is what will be there in that simulated future. So we have to be very careful to make sure we bring the best of humanity into that world. You know, virtual reality, AR, augmented reality, all of those things, they're here. The market is exploding. I'm set to speak at Augmented World Expo this summer, and my speech is going to be about what the first episode of Futuristic Now was called, The Future is a Portal Inward. That was the first episode, and that's what my speech is going to be about. And it's all about the idea that we're not moving outside of ourselves, we're actually moving internally. We're moving more towards the self. I mean, it only makes sense if you think about what technology is doing to us. It's actually mirroring us. It's forcing us. You know, people talk about all the time, they say, well, you see everybody sitting around and they're staring at their phones and they're not interacting with the world. Where do you think the world is? The world is digital now. The world is becoming digital. It's in that phone that you're staring at. You're not getting away from anything. You're moving towards the world. We're moving towards a global mind. We're moving into that digital world. And so the future is a portal inward, and that is where I think this road leads to. Now, how we get there is going to be very interesting. Some of the questions and comments that I've gotten so far are really interesting because a lot of people were saying, what happens when the singularity happens? Let's say it's 25, 30 years away. I think it's going to be sooner than that. But when computers become self-aware and more intelligent than us, when quantum computers become more intelligent than us, and they're able to create these simulations faster than we can realize that they're creating them. Think about that. These quantum computers that can access data. There's really no way for us to describe. You can try to describe it, but it's very hard to describe a machine that could be billions of times more intelligent than any of us. And so when that machine, those quantum computers and those quantum machines become self-aware and they realize that they can create these simulated worlds, if we have tapped into that world with our minds, if we already have brain-computer interface chips inside of our minds, those machines may start creating simulations without our knowledge, and only because our brains can only process information at a certain speed. Now, we could always augment our minds in the future as we move towards the singularity, and we probably will. My fear is that if we lose control of that ability to know when the threshold has been crossed into the simulated world, what does that mean for us and our reality? So that's the road getting there. The final part of this is what happens when we get there and when the machines decide to break our cognitive memory, our ability to understand or remember when we've crossed that threshold. And what I'm saying here is, imagine you've uploaded your consciousness into a machine substrate in the future, or if you have a computer chip or a neural lace implanted into your brain, and you're constantly in the digital world whenever you want to be, right? Well, if that computer decides, while you're in that system and you're in the virtual reality, you're in the simulated reality, if that system decides to break the continuity of your cognitive mind and it erases and we can talk about memory erasing memories as well, but if it decides to erase the moment that you went into the simulation, not only that, but if it decides to erase everything before you went into the simulation, you would have no idea, because it could create a history for you that you had always been there. That's what this last episode was about. This last episode was about breaking mental continuity and the machines getting so smart that they could erase the moment that you went into the simulation. And so you find yourself inside of a simulated world that is indistinguishable from reality, and it has replaced that threshold of entrance. Sounds crazy, but this is literally one of the things we're going to face in the future. So now that I've explained all that, hopefully that makes some sense to you. I'm going to take some of your comments and questions. Hey, Joshua. So Gabriel actually is asking about super intelligent machines of the future. He's saying that it's hard to imagine these machines that are, let's say, billions of times smarter than us. The reason, there's several layers to trying to understand and trying to think about machines that are that smart. First of all, you're talking about a synthetic intelligence that may or may not have a body. It doesn't have the neurochemical reactions that we have. It doesn't have a natural sort of, it doesn't have empathy. It may not have empathy. Those neurochemical sensations that we experience, that may not be how those machines think at all. So it may not be something that's out of their character. It may not be something that they see as wrong to erase our history or replace our memories. It may be something that they see as an efficiency. If they think that that's efficient, then that's maybe what they'll move towards. See, here's the question, and this is what we should be thinking about when we're creating AI and when we're creating virtual worlds, when we're hooking our brains to these machines. Those machines aren't going to play by the rules that we've played by throughout our evolution. We are birthing a new species, a new type of intelligence on this planet that we may not even be able to relate to. So the question is really, does that happen before we merge our brains with our computers and our computer chips, and we play in that digital space? Does it happen before that? Because if it does, then we have some sort of warning, because we can see the relationship that these machines are starting to develop with us. So the singularity obviously has to happen before you can have the post-singularity simulated future. So we will be able to assess that, but I actually think that as we move towards the singularity, by that time, more and more people will be sort of bound to the digital world, whether that's through things like, Elon Musk saying that he wants us to implant neural lace into our brains or whatever. And there are going to be other systems that come up besides that one, but the idea that you could implant something in your brain and be able to directly interface with the digital world at any given moment, it brings up a lot of questions of continuity of mind and mental stability and safety. So that's going to be interesting to see. So I just wanted to, do this live show to sort of give you guys a little bit of a deeper dive. And I think I'm going to do this going forward for the other shows. I might do this next week and talk, sort of backtrack and go back over the other episodes. For those of you that have just joined us, if you've not seen the other episodes of Futuristic Now, you can just go to my YouTube channel and watch the videos on there. And also too, if you guys haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I don't get to say that in the recorded version of this, so now I'm schlepping my channel. Anyway, so I just wanted to go through, I'm getting a lot of questions here. Let's see. So when do you think, so Jay is asking, when do you think we'll have full full immersion VR. So very interesting question. So when you say full immersion, what you have to think about is sensorial experience, right? So the question has been for a while whether we need all of the sensorial experience that we have in our bodies now. Do we need the actual body the way virtual reality is trying to mimic those sensorial experience? That's why you see these virtual reality companies creating chairs that move and swivel. They're trying to move that inner ear fluid around. They're trying to convince your sensorial body that you're in that space and trick you into thinking that you're in there. That's the goal. And to have full immersion, you would have to either build a system, whether that's a bodysuit or a platform or some sort of machine that could move you around to make you think that you're in that space by overriding and hacking your bio-digital body, or, and this is where I think virtual reality is going to go eventually. I think this is where the companies are starting to tap into. If you are in a state of, let's say, unconscious, maybe that's a sleeping state, maybe it's maybe you're taking a sedative to be in this full immersion state. If your brain is hooked up to a computer, if your brain has a microchip in it, if you have some sort of neural lace, the computer can actually override all of your sensorial experiences and mimic sensorial experiences directly to the brain. So your body doesn't have to communicate that nervous system response. Literally what's happening is it's going from the computer directly into your brain, and your brain believes that it feels cold. I mean, that's full immersion. When we can hack the brain and we can trick the brain into thinking that the virtual reality space is there and that you're literally at the beach and it's hot and there's sand under your feet when in fact you're just laying in your bed and you've got this computer chip inside of your brain or this EEG system on your head. That's when we have full immersion, when we can override the body and go directly to the brain. So to answer your question, that's when that happens. We're not there. You know, implanting chips into the brain is very dangerous. So there may be, and actually there are some technologies. I think what's happening right now is that the path towards the simulated future is really broad right now. There's lots of different technologies that could get us there. And as we move towards that, it's going to narrow down, and some of these technologies will fall away, but just because they're redundant, or the technologies will fall away because they just won't work for full immersion. So that's to answer your question. Let's see, who's up next? Now imagine VR could be manipulated. So 67 Blind says, now imagine VR that could be manipulated so you see something you can only physically see and feel. The ability to manipulate that sort of power is scary. I mean, scary, I know what you mean. It feels scary. I mean, I go through periods, I mean, this is my full-time work. This is my life. I mean, I am constantly talking about and thinking about the future. And all of these technologies, some of them they feel scary. They feel frightening because there's an attachment that we have to our ego as humans and to our brains and to this reality. And we're so convinced that this is real. And we're so convinced. I mean, my base is, just so that you guys who don't know me very well, my influences are primarily from Zen Buddhism, you know, philosophers like Alan Watts, Terence McKenna. Those are the philosophers that I sort of gravitate towards. And on the technological side, I sort of gravitate towards FM 2030 and, you know, Kurzweil, of course. Those, Kevin Kelly, those are the kinds of futurists that I sort of gravitate towards. And primarily, when I think about the future and these technologies, whenever I feel scared, I always go back to the idea of, am I scared because the technology is going to take something from us, or am I scared because this is something new that's changing? And actually what I find is that when you sort of meditate on this and when you start to think about the technologies that feel frightening and the things that we're going to see in the future, I think a lot of it has to do with our attachment to this reality. And anyone who's ever experimented with psychedelic substances knows that this is not reality. This is just a little sliver of what is out there. You know, the human brain is only perceiving a very small little fragment, a pixel, a tiny little pixel of information in a huge landscape. You know, I talk about the digital cosmos and the idea that we are just one small line of code in this huge algorithm, in this computational system that we find ourselves in. So are we afraid of the grandeur of that huge enormity that we're becoming a part of because it feels foreign to us? So you have to remember that we're still evolving. This is not the final stage. We are still evolving. And I do believe that we're evolving into a technological species. And so that may feel frightening, but it has probably been frightening for every incarnation throughout human history as we've evolved. There were probably times where we, as a species, saw that new group breaking off and going across the plains with something called language that, you know, we didn't have before. And that must have been frightening. And I think this can be considered frightening too when you see these technological things that are coming. But what I want to say to all of you is that before you sort of get paralyzed by that fear, and it can be overwhelming, you know, we're in a really bizarre time right now. I mean, we're in this really freaky moment in our evolution where everything is sort of collapsing down. It's almost like we're moving towards a black hole. I mean, singularity. But it's this cognitive crunch that we're going through. And I think any of you that are really tapped into this, any of you who, especially the people that I'm friends with and my peers and people that I talk to in this field, there's something really miraculous happening right now. And it's magical. It's literally magical. Things that we never thought we'd be able to accomplish, we're able to do right now. And we're just at the beginning of this technological movement. So I know it can feel scary, and I know that it can be polarizing. You know, I've said many times that it's not technology versus humans. I keep saying, and I keep saying this to all of you, that we are technology. This is a technological cosmos. This is a computational cosmos. Math and geometry were here before we ever arrived, before the Earth ever cooled. Math and geometry existed way before we got here. We're the new ones. We are the new ones. All of this technology, this webcam, how you're watching me right now, all of that stuff is new. We're new. The cosmos is much, much, much older than us. So I know it's hard to get your head around some of this. I mean, it's hard for people who work in this and do this full time. And I know it can be scary, but I'm just asking you to meditate on that before you jump into fear. That's your amygdala. That is the old way of thinking. We need to have a new way of thinking. We need to create a new narrative for a new future. And I know that a lot of you that follow me, and I know that a lot of you that are watching, you understand that. I fought for a very long time trying to figure out how I could really popularize futurism and how I could popularize this. And I have to tell you, I don't necessarily think it's about that. I mean, I've done television, I've done news shows, I've done everything at this point, except, well, I've done movies. I've done everything I could to popularize futurism. And I think I came to the realization a couple of months ago that what we're doing right now, and you're a part of it. What we're doing right now is not for right now. This is for the future generation that's going to look at this and say, wow, there was a group of people that understood that this was coming. how we would live in the future. They understood that this was going to happen. And so I'm starting to realize now that this doesn't necessarily need to be super popular. It doesn't need to be 50 million followers. I would hope that that's the case. And eventually maybe that will happen on this planet. I think that there's a huge portion of people that are going to be forced to pay attention to this. And as the world becomes more saturated with new technologies, maybe those people will pay attention to it, and maybe they'll just do what most of the people have done now. They'll just, take in the technology without really questioning what it is or what it does to them, or what it means philosophically. And that's what this show is about. That's what you guys are here to talk about. That's what you guys are. That's why what you guys are doing is important. It's why this movement is important. The movement of futurism. So I'm going to wrap this up in about 5 minutes, but I just wanted to go through and look at a few more questions. So Outsider says, when you think about the future as an optimist like Ray Kurzweil, do you also recognize that some aspects are cyberpunk dystopias? I'm so glad that you brought that up because I have worked on a couple of films and sci-fi projects, sci-fi films, as a futurist advisor. And typically the shows that I've worked on have been dystopian. They're dark. Everything is so dark right now. And I think it's because of that fear factor that people are really frightened of what's happening. I think it's because they don't understand their own nature. We don't have a real true narrative of what and who we are. And so that foreign, what feels foreign, we can sort of project our fears, and we can project, unfortunately, we can project that sort of amygdala mind onto these objects. So I do recognize that a lot of sci-fi is dystopian. I recognize that a lot of futurists actually can be very dark. And I think cyberpunk is interesting because I think originally it was meant to be a warning for a future that we necessarily didn't want to go to, we didn't want to go towards. We don't, as glamorized as it has become, and as glamorous as Blade Runner is, and as much as I love Blade Runner and I love that world visually, I don't really want to live in that world where it's toxic. I don't want to live in that world where we have to build a seawall to keep out the rising oceans because we've messed up the planet's ecosystem. And I don't, again, going back to the Zen Buddhist principles, balance is what we're looking for here. That's actually why I like solarpunk much better, because I feel like solarpunk is eventually what we'll get to, I think. I mean, we're going to make lots of mistakes, we already have, but we are sort of moving towards the solarpunk direction where vertical farms are popping up everywhere. You're starting to see an ecological balance. I mean, think about the recycling movement. I mean, those technologies, desalinization, all of those technologies, those are solarpunk ideas where technology is still there, but we're using it in a beneficial way, in a balanced way that allows us to still evolve and stay on this planet. I mean, Mars is romantic, but there's no air there. And even though I feel like we do have to go there to sort of back up, our species, we can't abandon this world for Mars. We have to make sure that we make this planet better and that technology is actually making our planet better. So, some of the themes in Futuristic Now for you guys that are new to this, some of the themes in this are, I'm not necessarily advocating for some of the themes. I'm actually just presenting you some of the ideas and saying this is some of this is coming and some of this is going to happen. So it's really, part of this is really for you to decide, is this what you want? Do you want to live in a world where you have to wear a mask to go outside? Or do you want to live in a world where you have magical technologies that allow you to live an abundant life? I mean, Jacques Fresco from the Venus Project, he was He was one of my big influences, and he was on it. He understood that this solar punk, this solar utopia is possible. And so I think I'm going to leave you guys with that. I know there were lots of questions on here. So actually, Lucas, I'll take your question. I'm worried about the backlash against transhumanist technologies. I think there's a lot of fear based around transhumanism. And really, transhumanism is just a philosophical idea that we're still evolving. So if that scares people, there's a reason that it scares people. And I'm not going to go deep into it right now. It can be for another show. But what I want to say is that that's part of the old narrative. You know, the old narrative, if you're a scientist and you believe in evolution, that you know we're still evolving. And that's what transhumanism is. It's not about becoming machines that are, you know, deathly painful in this sort of cyber dystopia future. It's not what that is. Super intelligence, super longevity, and I forget what the third one is. Anyway, I think it was David Pierce's 3 ideas that super longevity, super intelligence, and super well-being, I think were the 3 of his idea of transhumanism. And I subscribe to that. That is what I think where we should be headed. I don't think that we should throw out our humanity and our empathy to become machines, because the machines that we make and will become will carry that with us. And that may not be the future that we want. So anyway, I'm going to sign off for now. And I wanted to thank you guys for watching. And thank you for all your support on the show and for your questions. And I will comment on this video later. I will answer some of your questions that I didn't get to. So I think that's it. So hopefully you guys have a good evening, and I will see you all soon. Okay, take care.